Redditors who considered once joining the military, but never did. What made you not go forward with the decision? Sometime in the early 70s, I was working in a small hamburger joint. Noticed two guys in army fatigues coming through the drive-thru. I went running up to the window and was like, hey, you guys are in the army? I'm fixing to join the army too. Got about a 5-minute lecture about how stupid I was if I did, how they freaking hated it, and how if I liked being told what to do all the time to go ahead, but otherwise not to. I called the recruiter the next day and told him I changed my mind. You met two angels that day. I took some entrance test for the Navy when I was still in high school. The recruiter said he could get me anywhere in the world working as a machinist and not on a boat if I didn't want to be. My father, a Vietnam vet, forbade it and said absolutely not. My dad was a Korean War vet and basically said not the army and don't go in as an enlisted man. Eyes weren't good enough to be a pilot, although I got those certs as a civilian. I have an eye condition that disqualified me. Recruiter told me to just not mention it. Then the recruiter acted all mad and surprised when I couldn't pass a vision test. Got to make that quota at all costs apparently. Recruiters are notoriously unethical. My dad was not a fan and he was in for 20 years. Heck, before I joined the army I considered the Navy. Had a recruiter come by to give me information. He picked me up for lunch and an hour later we were at MEPS. When I said I wasn't ready, just wanted some info, he got P and drove me home immediately. Never spoke a word on the way home. When I was about 18 I wanted to join the Air Force. Thought it'd be awesome to be a pilot. The recruiter told me that it was impossible with my terrible eyesight. I was very nearsighted and wore glasses. He tried to sell me on the idea of joining anyhow. Told me there was plenty of other stuff I could do even if I couldn't be a pilot. But that was the end of the dream for me. Just tell them you will fly really close to the stuff you need to blow up. Right before I went to basic I got hit by a car while riding my motorcycle and broke most of the bones on the left half of my body. Have a metal rod in my leg. Military doesn't like cyborgs. Yet. My friend was going to join the Marines. He ended up backing out because a month before going to boot camp he fell in love with a girl. My sister was going to join the Air Force but because she had a thyroid problem she was denied. No. You're supposed to fall in love with a stripper immediately after you finish boot camp. He got it backwards. I gave up on the idea because I had physique like Steve Rogers, Captain America, before he went through super soldier experiment. Then just go through the super soldier procedure. Captain America did it in the 40s. They must have perfected it by now. SMH. I kept testing positive for weed. After third test the recruiter just gave up. Found out years later my oldest sister was lacing the cookies she gave me because she was scared I might get killed while deployed. Kind of glad she did because I was just joining because my best friend was joining. He got killed on his first deployment. I'm sure that you hear it a lot, but sorry about your friend. I got recruited by the US Army into a test program where I would spend 2 years in college with tuition covered and a stipend. After 2 years, I would be rolled into basic training and go from there to finish college. Signed the papers, went through MEPS, and though everything was good, my recruiter gets transferred to another station and they assign me to a new guy. I started at the university and I have monthly workout meetings with my new recruiter. Months go by, no money for tuition or stipend have come in. Recruiter says he is looking into. The year goes by, no money still. The head recruiter says that he is going to take me on personally and apologizes for the army losing me in the system. Decided that was a sign and I exited the program. Since they never gave me anything, I didn't owe them anything. But I always wondered if things would have been different if I had still had my original recruiter. Weirdly, he was in a town 40 minutes from the university, which was the same distance the new guy had to drive. I talked to dozens of people who were already in or discharged. I asked all of them if it was worth it. None of them seemed very enthusiastic about answering the question. I always tell people it was the best 4 years of my life and the absolute dumbest 4 years of my life, and you couldn't pay me to do it again. Got a call from a Navy recruiter and after a few questions he asked my height and weight. His response: boy, if I let you in the Navy you'd sink the ship. So that ended my naval career. I'm sorry, but that's funny. I was 17 and had graduated high school. I didn't want to go to college, so I was recruited by the Navy. I even bought a study guide and took the ASVAB test. It took a few months of talking to the recruiter and he was waiting for me to turn 18, which would have been in November, and this was around August. This was in 1989. I'm old. Recruiter promised me I would go to Florida for basic, home for 2 weeks, then on to Texas to go to school for nursing. Then I would get to go to one of my top 3 choices to be stationed. I had to pick ones with hospitals. Women weren't allowed on ships or in combat during that time. He promised a few other things. I was excited to go. Then I told my older brother, who was away at college. He got upset and tried to talk me out of it. He then made me a deal. Since I wasn't listening to him, he said when I talk to the recruiter, to have him put all his promises in writing and sign it. If he doesn't, then I have to promise not to join. So naive me figured the recruiter would do it. He wouldn't promise me things he couldn't deliver. The next time I met with him, I told him what my brother said. He basically said he can't do that and only the president could sign something like that. So I told him to get the president's signature or I can't go. I walked out and never looked back. For a few years I got recruitment calls and letters from all the armed forces. I'm glad I didn't go. Honestly, at the time I was depressed as frick and felt completely worthless, so didn't really care if I got killed. I wanted that to happen. I figured dying in service wouldn't garner the same shock for my family as suicide. I realized though that I wouldn't get through the medical evaluation with evidence of self-harm and a current antidepressant prescription. This was years ago. I'm out of that hole now. That's the same reason I joined the Marine Corps. Myself, I did 4 years of infantry, then got out and started living life. I'm in a better place mentally now. Glad you are doing good as well. Got too tall. David Robinson was apparently under 6'6" when he began at the Naval Academy and grew later. Once I hit 6'7" they rescinded all offers. That's sad. Being tall lets you down at times. When I was little I wanted to be a pilot, but apparently you have to be below 6'2" for that. Sometimes you outgrow your dreams. Also, space shuttles also have a height cap. If humanity were to leave Earth, tall peeps might have to start back. I thought long and hard about joining the Coast Guard and being a rescue swimmer. Can't shoot for crap. I was always doing volunteer work growing up and a continuation of service seemed appropriate. Plus, was always pretty athletic and a very good swimmer. Tops on my teams growing up and in high school. It was my dad, who served in the army in Vietnam. Never deployed though, so didn't see the worst of it, who talked me out of it. Looking back at it at 35 with a job I am so exhausted with, I wish I had done it. But hey, grass is always greener, right? The Coast Guard changed its enlistment criteria a few years ago. You can still enlist as a reservist until age 37. I wanted to be a Marine. My grandpa was one and I really looked up to him. When I told him I was gonna enlist, he called me a dumbass. He said you have to know what you're fighting for. I fought for the lives of others in a world war. You, my son, would be fighting for oil. Don't be a dumbass. Dang. That's poignant and poetic. I'm just not the kind of person who wants to go through boot camp. My brain is my tool. My body is a boneless chicken nugget. And I'm okay with that. My body is a boneless chicken nugget. I think this describes a lot of us, LMAO. Also our brand new sentence. By the time I managed to finish my degree, a requirement of OTS, I'd had cancer, lost a kidney, and was thus medically disqualified. I really wanted to join the Coast Guard. I lived in middle of nowhere Kansas and I wanted to get as far away as possible. Plus I loved boats and lakes and the ocean. This was 1998 or so. I told my gym teacher in my junior year I wanted to sign up and asked if she could help me prepare for basic because she was ex-military of some kind. She said I was too fat and if I couldn't do a dozen push-ups her training me would be a waste of her time. She was a B. I thought I was fat for years after that, but I'll look at the pictures from the 90s and I was maybe a size large. Definitely not too fat for basic. It wouldn't have been fun but not impossible. She basically admitted that she was so crap as a trainer that she would only be able to do anything if you were already fit. My father did not care for the decision and he begged me not to go in that recruitment office. He's seen what the enemy and our own state does to our own veterans. He does not want that for his children. I'm sorry, armed forces veterans and those who are overseas. Everyone's experience is different, that I can assure you. How scummy the recruiters are. Figured if you have to lie to people to get them to enlist, then the job itself can't possibly be that great. A good friend who is a few years older than me was in the 101st Airborne, had been stationed in Korea during the late 90s/2000. Gave me some advice that I'm pretty happy I followed. I had 2 years of free community college thanks to some A+ program from high school. So he said, while I would likely excel in the army, go take advantage of the free college, get my associates, and then reassess how I felt about joining, and go from there. It just happened that during those 2 years at community college, I met a gorgeous girl and fell in love, married now for 14 years, together for 18. And decided I didn't want to leave her for the military. Thinking back, had I joined right after graduation May 2001, just 4 months before 9/11 and all the war that followed, it kind of freaks me out how differently my life could have gone. I would never have made it through boot camp. Not that I would have fought anybody, I just don't respond well to that. I shut down. If you have been to a day camp of any sort, it is basically like that but with a lot more yelling and ridiculous procedures. I only remember being yelled at personally once or twice during basic. Otherwise, they are yelling at everyone and you can just kind of stand there and stand still until they move on. Talked with several military members about it and I decided that my reasons for wanting to join were not good reasons to join the military. The Navy recruiter promised I'd be working on nuclear submarines and promised a whole bunch of other stuff. I told my English teacher I was considering it and she told me they were full of it. All those promises vanish as soon as you enter boot camp. Eventually I didn't join up. A few years later my brother joined up. The Navy promised him he'd be working on high-tech computer security, which would translate into great opportunities in the private sector. I told him what my teacher had told me but he signed up anyway. He spent 2 years as someone's secretary and another couple of years selling candy bars at base's newsstand. I was turned down because I was underweight for my height. Told me to go away and put on 5 kilograms and then come back to them. May as well have asked me to put on 500 kilograms, lol. I'm just one of those naturally thin people that struggle to put weight on. Dunno if anyone will see this comment, but this old quote kept coming back to me. Military might abroad is useless without prudent counsel at home. Cicero. It just never seemed like I'd ever trust the system pulling the strings. Agreed. I'm willing to fight for a good cause, not bomb some poor people who never did anything to me. I was really only interested in aviation. Too short for the AF. Tall enough for the initial Navy height requirement. Took the exams. Went to MEPS. Got my board packet all put together. Just waiting for the next board date. Started reading online about the size thing because I was skeptical. Found out they take what they call anthropometric measurements after OCS to figure out what aircraft you can fit in. Arranged to have these taken prior to actually joining. Basically every single one of my measurements was too small. I was sad at the time, but it definitely would not have been a good environment for my mental health. So I'm actually very thankful now that I'm a homunculus. I wanted to go into the Air Force Academy. My dad asked a family friend that was a full bird colonel to get a general friend, a friend with the rank of general, not a friend of unspecified category of his, to give me a recommendation. Our family friend told me that he found someone to recommend me but he wanted to talk to me first. He told me that, knowing me, I'd spend all my time and energy trying to change the Air Force and, knowing the Force, they'd spend all their time and energy trying to change me. He also said that they're way bigger than me. He'd seen friends of his with personalities like mine destroyed for life by their run-ins with the Force. He recommended that I didn't join up and, for maybe the first time in my life, I took someone else's advice and stayed out. Currently in the position of wanting to change the environment. Realized most of the people on all levels keep the status quo despite not liking it. It's beyond me. The only way I wanted to join the military was to fly in the Air Force. I was told by a recruiter in high school I was too tall, I'm 6'2", to fly. So, frick that noise. Turns out, I'm not too tall. That recruiter was just being a bro and saving me from a dumb decision. He wasn't being a bro, he was probably telling you that hoping you join as enlisted. Only officers can fly traditional aircraft in the Air Force, which requires a bachelor's degree. Since 5th grade I wanted to join the military. For most of that time I wanted to join the army, go airborne, and jump out of planes and kill terrorists. I watched a few documentaries and all the war movies, and the thought of going to the most dangerous places in the world was extremely appealing to me. But then I talked to a lot of army vets and not a single one said it was a good idea to join the army. So I decided I wanted to join the Air Force. I wanted to be a pilot, but going to college to come in as an officer was out of the question. So I wanted to become a PJ and be one of the guys that goes in and saves the SEALs. But you need to be a strong swimmer to be special forces, and even after working my butt off for 2 summers I just couldn't do it. I've had meetings with recruiters from every branch. All of them extremely appealing. But senior year I did a ride along with the fire department and had a change of heart. I'm now a paramedic and extremely happy with how I've turned out. Most of my friends joined different branches, and they still try to talk me into joining at least the National Guard. But I've been able to tack myself out of it so far. I'm much happier serving my community, and I'm doing more and seeing more trauma and GSWs than my combat medic friends. I scored pretty high on some aptitude tests and they hounded me. Decided the chances of dying and or getting raped were not worth the possible college money, and anyone that desperate had a bad reason to be. In my senior year of high school I had been seriously prepping to join the army. Now this was in 2006, and at the time the fighting in Iraq was quite bad. Now being a testosterone driven dude I was all like, heck yeah, time to go fight. My parents had, of course, been watching all of this on the news and been dropping hints that they didn't approve of my decision to join. They weren't outright expressing disapproval of it though. On the week I was supposed to go finalize the paperwork and go to MEPS. I think that's what it was called anyways. Hard to remember. My parents had gone out with my older sister and came back home plastered. My dad, who I had up to that point only seen cry maybe once, began to break down and essentially begged me not to join. He seemed convinced that I followed through with my plans, I wouldn't be coming home. So that struck me pretty hard. So I ended up not following through with the enlistment and instead went to college and ended up smoking a crap ton of weed. I thought about it specifically for college assistants. Told my dad, who had been in the Navy, and he told me about the military's horrific history of allowing, excusing, covering up sexual assault and misogyny. I decided that student loans were preferable. My friends' teammates that graduated before me and did what I was looking to do in the military. After talking to them about their experience and seeing how they changed, it made me reconsider. I did ROTC for 2 semesters in undergrad. I didn't like it enough to consider making a career or even a single 4-year contract out of it. The cadre, save for the retired colonel who did the intro classes, was a dang mess. First of all, and to be honest, they were kind of a bunch of buttholes. The retired guy, Colonel D. Rhett, was cool, though. For example, our labs were run on a local ranch that belonged to an alumni that was kind enough to let ROTC cadets wander around on an unused part of his land. Every ROTC lab began at 3 p.m, meaning you had to be there at 2:30 p.m, unless you had class. For a lab that would not reasonably begin until at least 3:45 p.m. Meaning I'm sitting out there on my butt for 45 minutes doing literally frick all until the cadre arrives. After showing up, Colonel Ashat and Captain Blockhead are usually wanting to know why Cadet A wasn't here until 2:45 p.m, which is apparently just a primer for Dart Mill life. The cadre also love to imply that cadets shouldn't take any classes that were scheduled in the 2 o'clock to 2:50 p.m. 1400 to 1450 slot because they were supposed to be at lab early. They never directly punished anyone or demanded they drop a class, but they love to talk crap and bag on people who didn't care enough to be there early, even that reason was being in class. At the end of my freshman year, my interests had shifted, and I wasn't particularly interested in serving anymore, and was especially disinterested in ROTC, so I said deuces and never looked back. A few of my friends either dropped out and enlisted, or commissioned out of university. Hearing them and family talk about military experience, the military just sounds like a crap show from bottom to top. Enlisted and officer, between crappy work environments, crappy superiors, the threat of being blown up by buttholes, and the VA habitually losing the paperwork of injured veterans. It reinforces my feeling that I made the right choice not to join. That's not to disparage the people who did join, but I am very glad I did not join. Not all of the stories are bad, but enough were to make me very wary. No one had anything positive to say about the VA, though. My mom was very much opposed. At the time, I thought it better to keep her happy. I do regret not joining though. I could have used the discipline while in college. I'm a soldier deployed overseas. I am, in fact, still just as dysfunctional as I am at home. I'm just in a camouflage uniform and 6,000 miles away. Blind as a bat, and friend's dad, Marine, took me aside and explained that I would have to take orders, and that I don't do that very well. I considered joining the reserves. I just thought it would be nice to build up some retirement benefits, and my employer keeps paying their employees in the military if they are called in for duty. But ultimately I decided that I should try to spend my weekends enjoying life instead of adding another job when I really don't need the money. My friend was raped by another male at the Defense Force Academy and then kicked out of the army. So frick that and frick them. I'm sorry for your friend. Got a DUI. No one would touch me for 6 months minimum. Decided I could help people in nursing instead and have been slowly working towards that since. Here's hoping I get into nursing school this time. My uncle went to Sarajevo and Kosovo and came back a shell of a human being after witnessing what human beings do to each other. I'm an only child and my parents are divorced and on horrible terms. If I were to get killed or crippled, my mother would have no one to look after her. I got a perfect score on my ASVAB, Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, for non-Americans, test, and the recruiters were on me like white on rice to join. At 17 I looked into getting my GED, dropping out of high school, and joining the Marines. The Marine recruiter had all kinds of helpful advice. The only reason I didn't take this option was because I'd need a legal guardian's signature to do it, and mom would never go for it. Then they started closing bases in 1989 to 1990, and when I turned 18, I bumped into my recruiter, and he gave me the bad news. The Marines wouldn't take me with astigmatisms in both eyes because of their change recruiting goals. The next year, the recruiter called me at home and told me they changed the vision requirements back, but by this time I had a job and a girl, so I politely declined. The Marines were after my kid all last year as a junior based on him being a football player and he worked out with them. They got considerably less interested when they found out he was an honor student with a 3.95 average. They rightly figured out he was going to college. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.